Welcome back, Barneys. Today we're going to be shaping longboard rails. I'm going to show you how to get them symmetrical, how to get either a low rail, a high rail, 60-40 rail, 50-50 rail, whatever type of rail that makes your little heart happy. I'm Zack Flores. I've shaped probably 400 something surfboards and been doing it for about 12 years. This is part of my series on how to shape a surfboard, and specifically a longboard this time. Go check out my old series on how to shape a surfboard for a shortboard if you are interested in shaping a shortboard. And let's get into it. Step one is going to be checking where your board is at before you start shaping it. So I'm going to flip the board over and use my level to see how symmetrical or asymmetrical we are. So last time I was here, I went over and double checked everything. So if you use your level, get it leveled in the middle. A lot of levels aren't going to be weighted perfectly, so I'll put a little weight on one side, make sure the bubble's in the middle and it's balanced on the stringer. And I'll go all up and down the board doing that until I know that everything's correct, basically side to side. If you take this step first by getting the bottom even or totally symmetrical, it's going to be so much easier later when you're shaping your rails, because there's going to be no guesswork involved. When you're using your level, and if one side is high, you can take your planer. If it's, a quarter of an inch higher, I would use your planer. If it's just a tiny little bit, pick up your shear form and go ahead and clean it up and just keep checking back and forth. And do long, smooth lines like this when you're cleaning it up. And if you have one area that is high and then the rest of it is equal, say this spot on the board right here is high, you're gonna wanna not go like this, back and forth. That's bad, that's gonna give you lumps and not be good. If, say again, this area is high and the rest is good, you just wanna across the whole thing, back and forth until you get it correct. In my opinion, on a board with roll or belly, wherever the belly starts is where the rail starts. Let's say we have roll coming from the stringer, the center of the board, all the way out to the rail. I want this whole section to flow together smoothly. I don't want a big flat spot and then a bunch of roll off the rail, or a bunch of roll here and then it going straight out the rail. For my style of longboarding, I like to have it connect smoothly from the center all the way up to the apex of my rail. And it looks really nice when you do that. This is also your last chance to clean up your outline if you haven't done it very well yet. Remember, you want everything completely square running off the edge of your board or wherever you cut the outline. Because if it's in like this a lot or out like that a lot, depending on where you shape your rail and if both sides are the same or whatever, it's going to make your outline asymmetrical, lumpy, and ugly. So clean it up. Yeah. If you don't have this tool, go get one out of the link below. It's not necessary for doing rails, but it will amazingly increase your ability to get stuff symmetrical. So go get one. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and mark at 6 inches, and it doesn't need to be exact, so I'm just going to leave my pencil about where that is. And then line up my shaper square with that, go all the way across. And then on this side, I'm going to do the same thing, go all the way across. And then I'm just going to flop over my shaper square. These are always going to be about 12 inches exactly. And so I'm just going to mark every 12 inches across the bottom of the board, all the way back. Now I'm going to take the planer and start doing my first pass on the rails. All I'm going to be doing is holding my planer like normal with the cord wrapped around my arm, about my finger. separate for the trigger. Gonna get my hand on the knob correctly. I'm going to keep switching back and forth from having the board flat like this on the rack and then having the board at an angle in the racks. And I'm doing that so I can get different angles onto the rails using this. I'm going to start bringing the bottom of the board up to the apex of the rail. If you're not sure where you're going to want the apex of the rail, you can eyeball it first, maybe put a couple of marks if you really want to, and you don't want to go at a super hard angle or you're just going to have like a 45-degree angle to a 90-degree angle, and that's not going to be good. You want to really take your time, bring it up, and keep increasing the angle that you're holding the plane. So what I've done is I've slowly given myself an angle and started bringing the bottom of the board up to where the axis of the rail is going to be. If you want, with these lines that we drew out, you can measure from the stringer out to the point that the line is gone and put a little dot there. Then you will know how far in you came with your passes on your planer. And that's a good way to just say, okay, like, don't come in any further than this, and then you'll stay symmetrical better. So now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and when you do that, just keep checking back and forth. And the reason we have this thingy here is later, or whenever, technically you could now, but you can measure, assuming that you did the deck correctly, and both sides are still the same. They're not, one side's not completely lopsided from the other. You can take this thingy, bring it up to the point on the rail that you finished shaping to, and walk over, use this line, and stick it up to that point, mark it with your pencil, and then you'll have boundaries with which you know where to take out foam. If you're trying to get it really, really even, I think that's the best way to do it. A lot of people use just their eyes to do this kind of stuff, and I think that's a little silly because it's way easier to just measure stuff and it's going to come out way better. If you want to do all this stuff, go for it. If you really don't care if your board is absolutely perfect or not, neither do I. So go ahead and do whatever you want. I went ahead and did those markings all along on each side. I'm going to go ahead and make the other side identical to this, and then we will put the board in the rack sideways and start bringing the apex of the rail up. I'm just going ahead before I get all the way to my markings and double checking with this, and we're looking good. So I'm going to keep going, get all the way to my markings where it should be equal on each side, and then we'll keep going. So if you guys wanted to do a 60-40 rail, instead of starting by blending up from further in on the rail, you're just going to start more like you would on the shortboard, closer to the rail and pulling it up. If you want to do a total down railer, you don't even pull up that much. Just a little bit of flip on the bottom and then go from there. Or if you want to do a 50-50 rail, you do a bit more of an extreme version of what I'm doing here, and you start rolling up from the belly, and the rail's somewhat thin at the apex, but it's just 50-50. Rolled on the deck and rolled on the bottom. Adjust to however you want your rail. The way I do it is a light belly. I make sure to take out the extra thickness in this on the sides right here in the middle, and I try and make a separate rocker for the rails that is separate rocker from the stringer. So this is gonna have one rocker, this is gonna have another rocker, and the goal is to get them to blend together nice and pretty. There's not a lot of things in this world that I need to be perfect, but unfortunately for my brain, longboard rails are one of those things that I need to be perfect in order for me to sweep. So now that I got each side totally symmetrical, or at least to the best of my ability, I'm going to flip it in the rack and start pulling up the rail to the axis. See, I didn't take that much off here, and I got my axis point. You can see it in that shadow. I got my axis point down. So now what I'm going to do is, again, just blend this part of the rail up to the axis and get that exactly how I want to, and then go ahead and do it on the other side. Now I got the rails turned up to where I'm okay with it starting on the top now. So we are going to flip the blank over and start on the top. So now I got the bottom tucked up, and I'm going to start foiling the rocker of the rail on the top. So same thing basically that we did on the bottom. It's going to flow up into the deck, but we're going to start basically from the apex here and build our way up till we're crowning the deck. And the nose is still a little chunky here because I'm going to be doing concave, and so I'm going to be bringing this up later, so I'm just leaving this basically alone for now, and then I'll take care of it once we're doing the concave. So now you can see I've gotten the rail chimed down, so I have a big flat plane going across, and I brought it to the point where I know I'm going to want my rail thickness about. And so I have it here. Now I'm gonna start blending this stuff together. So it might be a little hard to see, but I have that whole chime going down to about the apex of my rail, but I leave probably like 3/4 of an inch away from it, so I have plenty of room to work blending them together. So that's what I'm gonna do now, and I'm not gonna go all the way down to that apex. You always want to leave a little bit of room there so that you don't go too low, and then you can touch it up with a sanding block at the end. Sorry, I should have said do the same thing to the other side first, because it's a lot easier to replicate. Now that I got both sides of my rails chimed, so there's a angle going down to the rail, and it's about 3/4 of an inch above the axis. I'm going to start foiling over the top to finish off this part of the rail, and then technically this is all part of the rail, foiling all the way up onto the deck, but I'm not going to go too detailed into that. And just like I said, all of the deck is technically still part of the rail. I'm not going to get into that in detail because it's the same thing as the bottom. You start pulling from the center all the way up, and from here, say if you want a flat deck, it's going to be a little bit different. That's what I'm doing here. It's going to be a flat deck and even concave on the deck. So that's going to be a little bit different, but for a normal longboard, you just don't want any big extreme breaks in the rail, changing angles too much. You're just going to want to have everything a nice smooth curve, just like if you're doing belly on the bottom, and it's the same exact process. So this is what my rail looks like basically. I know it's a little tricky to see. It's all pulled up from the bottom, then we got our flat edge on the deck, and I'm going to start, sorry for the audio, but I'm going to use the microphone to point. This is the apex right there, and then it goes up, it's all flat. And then we have our hard edge on the deck, and we're going to blend that up from the apex. We're going to come down also, but mostly going up top so we don't mess up our... And just like on the bottom, all we're doing is changing the angle of the planer. So if we're here on the axis, we're going to want to roll up. If we're coming down towards the axis, you want to roll down. So this is a flat square angle right here on the edge of the board, and we don't want to hit the bottom of our apex. We don't want to hit the apex at all. We want to give it at least 1/4 inch, because if you hit the apex, then your rail isn't going to look so great and you're going to be bummed. So leave it at least 1/4 inch, probably maybe a little bit more, I don't know. That's what I do because that's good for me. But leave 1/4 inch running back, and then later you'll touch it up with your sanding block, and that's how you'll get the rail all nice and perfect the way you want it. So I know this is kind of hard to see, but I'm going to quickly touch up, sorry I got foam in both my eyes right now. I'm going to quickly touch up this part of the rail because I'm going to have hard edge on the deck. So the rail is basically done on the bottom here. So I'm going to touch it up right now before I start crowning or doing the top of the rail. I got my rail to a pretty good point, and now I'm gonna have to take out all of this chunk. Oh, that's actually a good way to show you guys the rail. It's like this. So down below, in this part down here, I got my boxy little rail, about where I like it, and all of this foam up here is going to disappear next. So I got my actual rail down here where I like it, and now I'm going to take away all this foam up here on the deck. So I dimmed one of my lights so you guys could see I'm working in big, long, flat planes, and then I crown them after. So I know it's kind of hard to see, but there's a big, probably 2-inch wide, 3-inch wide, whatever band right here that runs nose to tail, and I got my rail down to the thickness that I want it, and then I'm going to go from this point and start crowning everything. I'm doing big bands first and then blending everything together instead of trying to start blending everything, and it's harder that way because you don't have very many reference points. So this way you have a lot of reference, you know where you are on each side, and then you just keep moving forward. I'm working with the blank flat now, and I'm just gonna start crowning the deck, and we'll touch up the rails later. We got them like approximately where we want them, and then we're gonna really get them good and touched up and perfect and beautiful later. So as you may or may not be able to see that well, my rails are still really square on the top because I cut these big planes in across the deck of the whole board from nose to tail on each side. So now what I'm going to do is take my planer again and just start foiling out this deck line to right where I want it. And this is now the point where I'm really starting to get my rails tuned up and starting to get them looking somewhat like a final finished product. So I know it's kind of hard to see, but I got my rails about 65–70% of the way done. And on this board, since I'm doing concave on the deck in the tail, that's where I'm going to leave it for now. Usually though, I would go ahead and foil over onto the deck and keep things going, and I would get all this smoothed out so that it was all one continuous curve going up to the stringer, and that's what I would usually do. But since I'm doing concave on the deck in the tail, it's a bit more complicated, so I'm going to leave everything where it is now, and in the next video we're going to come back and I'm going to show you guys how to do concave in the tail of your longboard if you want to on the deck. Also, I'll be showing you guys how to do nose concave, and then in the final video I'll show you guys how to really tune up your rails and get everything pretty beautiful just the way you want it. Well, I'm done here. Remember guys, if you want to do a down rail, all you do is do less tuck on the bottom and more on the top. If you want to do a 60-40 rail, it's basically a less extreme version of that, just like I showed you, coming up a little bit further than if you were doing a down rail. Come up, bring your axis up a little further. If you want to do 50-50 rail, soft, whatever, put the axis in the middle. That's all there is to it as far as the different rail types. You want your axis to be in a different spot. With longboards, I found a thin boxy rail works really well. It does a lot of the things that I want it to do, and it's pretty versatile. It can work in a little bit bigger waves too. You're not stuck to, you know, sub chest high stuff like with too soft of a rail. Let me know your guys' questions. Thank you guys. This is part whatever of how to shape a surfboard. Make sure you guys like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one.